It is coming up on 8:40 News Talk, Sauga 960, Raw, Mike Richards, along with David Bastl. And as we've been telling you, the guest coming up here in mere moments, courtesy of our friend Chris from the ideashop.ca, is a real treat, a real thrill. And when you look at what people want to do with their lives, like we all do when we're children, it very much becomes a little bit of a fantasy world, which is okay. You should be able to dream and not have a ceiling on thoughts of what you think you can do. And when you're a kid, certainly like myself, which still that has not left me, I still have these thoughts. But I would say space travel, probably big in the world of a child. Living underwater, so you say these things to your parents. It's like, one day I'm going to walk on the moon and I'm also going to live underwater. Usually at that point, it's either the belt comes out or spankings in the day, or you had to go back out and do more chores, or you had to run around the block. I mean, something to tell you that they're fun thoughts, but they're not realistic thoughts. But there are other people who make those things happen. It's why the world progresses. It's what makes life special. And this guest, Dr. David Williams, who's joined us here this morning, does all those things. It is nothing short of remarkable what he has achieved in his lifetime. So we thank Dr. David Williams for joining us here this morning. Good morning, Dave.
Well, thanks very much, Mike. I'm absolutely thrilled to be with you today and share some of the stories from outer space and inner space. I read your resume and then I look into the mirror this morning and look at myself and go, I'm a zero. I've done nothing with my life. I mean, I bet on the Edmonton Elks last night. Not that I haven't bet on the Riders, just so we're clear on this. I don't want to get into a fight here because you've done so much in your lifetime. You're probably starting for the Riders next week. But everything that you have done, now the book that we're going to talk about, which I think is a very timely book, when you talk about leadership moments, when you talk about some of the things that have happened, and I'll be honest, when you talk NASA, it's also some of the heartbreak, some of the absolute disaster, and how we have moved on and how they figured out in problem solving, how to move life forward. But my question really does start back where it does for a lot of our guests. We see that this is the end result. We're going to buy this book because it's fascinating, and it's applicable in almost any walk of life, whether it's business or personal, which is why I love those books. But I believe you're a Saskatoon boy. Is that correct? That's where it all starts. I am indeed. Very proud.
And we love our Flatlanders. Dave's from Winnipeg. I lived out in Calgary for a period of time, and it's I'm a Westerner. I think just displaced for a long time, but it's where my heart is. So as you're growing up, I talked about this imagination to do things, and it's great to have that imagination. But there's so much that goes into actually being able to achieve it, including academically, scholastically, and maybe there's a little bit of luck. Maybe there's a little bit of luck in this, David. So how do you go from Saskatoon to the moon? Like, for instance, elementary school, good student, bad student, or little overactive imagination? What was it like for David Williams?
I would say I was a totally average kid, and I consider myself average in many ways. What differentiates me, I think, is the fact that I was willing to work really, really hard to pursue my dreams and not give up on my dreams. Don't let other people define them for you. Just simply believe in your own dream and go for it. In elementary school, my marks were totally average. I think if you'd asked the teacher who's going to be the astronaut, I probably would have been the last one picked.
David, when you're putting together a book like this, Leadership Moments from NASA, and considering everything Mike outlined in your resume and so much more, how difficult was it making sure as an author that you included everything that you wanted to, considering everything that you've achieved throughout your life?
Well, I was very lucky to be able to interview firsthand many of the people in the book. Where we weren't able to interview individuals, there are oral histories available with these key individuals on NASA's history site, and we were able to extract information from those interviews, the interviews we did, to craft a series of stories. This is not a definitive book on leadership at NASA. There are many other leadership stories. We tried to select some of the key stories and ask the question, who are the people behind this? How do these people make this happen? It's absolutely incredible.
Well, it's when you start talking about problem solving,
And I think there are moments even cinematically. So when you're watching Apollo 13, and it's one of those movies where there was a knot in my stomach almost the entire time. I mean, I look at a man who's got to go into a room in the, what was the 60s, and say to a bunch of individuals, if we don't figure out a way to do problem X, in this case, it's getting them back home, it's trying to find oxygen, they're all going to die. And at that point in our world, space exploration, the travel to the moon, there were a lot of hopes from Earth. I mean, this was very much a human problem. But there's whatever amount of guys are in that room, Dr. Dave, I'm turning to you and I'm saying, if you can't figure this out, and by the way, the clock is on, the clock is also ticking. They can't come home, and in front of the entire planet, they're all going to die. To work at NASA isn't you know, if you make a mistake in an accounting firm, or if I tell you to bet on the wrong team, which we did last night, if I run out of gas, like, there's a lot of different things and reactions to a disaster, but there's nothing like NASA. There's nothing that has the global inference on disaster like that. So when you work in that environment, there's got to be a trait. There has to be something in that environment that allows those people to do what they do. Now, again, in the book, we're going to talk about how you can apply it to your own life. But there's got to be something that these people have in NASA, Dr. Dave, including yourself, that differentiates themselves from the way that we live our lives. Something that maybe we can learn, but it's something that these people at NASA have.
Well, for Apollo 13, and as depicted in the movie, the flight director of the White Shift, Gene Kranz, was very famous at NASA for his, quote, tough and competent. And he developed that after the very tragic loss of the Apollo 1 crew down in a pad fire in January of 1967. Toughness speaks to resilience, that we're going to figure out this solution, we're going to make this work. Competency speaks to bringing the best that you can be to every situation that you're in. And clearly, with the White Shift in Apollo 13, Gene Kranz was able to lead that team in being tough and competent, find solutions. The Black Shift, that was the night shift. Glenn Lunny was the flight director. Everybody's heard of Gene Kranz, nobody's heard of Glenn Lunny. And yet Glenn Lunny and his team played as critical, if not more important role. The leadership styles of the two are quite different. Glenn Lunny's a totally different leader than Gene Kranz. There's no right and there's no wrong. It's what works. And I think what's really interesting is leadership is the art of influencing others. These two very different personalities were able to influence successfully and bring the crew of Apollo 13 home.
Dr. Dave, you're highlighting one of the things that I love, and it's a combination of, it's a history of space exploration. It's a memoir because you're there for a lot of it. You're interviewing the people, so that makes it very exciting. It's a self-help book. I mean, it's about space, but at the end of every chapter, what I love is there's these bullet points about what are we learning from this story, and on Gene Kranz, we've heard of him, the movie, the stories, but you're throwing the spotlight on some unsung, really do make a difference in those. It's as Mike was talking, it's a high stakes environment. It's not accounting. It's not it's not a game. It's life or death stuff. Is there any other I guess sort of people that you think highly of, that you threw the spotlight on in that book, that you could tell us about, that the average person may not have heard about from the movies or whatnot?
Yeah, there's many different people that we mentioned in the book. George Abbey, who was center director at Johnson Space Center at the time. I worked for Mr. Abbey for 4 years, and I worked directly with Joe Rothenberg, who was the associate administrator, working with Dan Golden. So there are many key figures, and I really can't do justice to the stories that they have. All of them were effective in influencing others. And what I found is, if you ask individuals, are you a leader in your organization? Most people say, well, no, I've got a job, and I may be on the org chart somewhere, but I'm not part of the leadership of the organization. And I would push back and say, we all have the opportunity to lead. If you simply ask the question, do you in your daily activities influence others? Of course, the answer is yes. So we step into leadership roles, we step out of leadership roles. Sometimes we're in followership roles. And that's one of the things that's really great about NASA. It's enabling everybody to bring out the best in each other, sometimes in a leadership role, sometimes in a followership role, but working together to solve problems.
Dr. Williams, we're really interactive here on the show, and we're getting a ton of questions. We could probably have you on for another 2 hours and still not answer everything, but one that's been repeated a couple of times. So you're the first Canadian to have lived and worked in space and the ocean itself. When you're comparing the two, which is basically opposites of society, where, personally speaking, this is you personally, where did you enjoy working most?
That's a really tough question. You know, in space, you got no neighbors. Living underwater, you go out on the reef and all the fish are your neighbors. For me, space is spectacularly beautiful because you have that whole planetary perspective, orbiting the Earth every 90 minutes, seeing a sunrise, sunset every 45 minutes, and realizing there's no borders between countries that we can see from space. We're all in this together. So we need to work collaboratively, globally, to be able to find solutions to today's problems.
Hey, maybe Dr. Dave, maybe you just don't like people. Ever thought about that?
Well, I don't know about that, because when you're stuck in a tin can with 7 other people or 6 other people, you really got to learn to like people.
I bet that's true. You know, what I find fascinating about this topic in this book, and as I said, it's not even specific to NASA or some of the actual vocations itself. It's the thought process. It's the one thing that I find that we get a lot in sports, because you know, when you put a team together, and I usually use football as the example because there's a lot of moving parts in football, a lot of different coaches, a lot of different areas. And people say, you know, it's that team concept where everyone goes out there because they have a certain role, a defined role. I said, that's true. But like you just mentioned, even when you're part of a team, you'll hear, for instance, a play-by-play guy say, but this guy makes plays. See, that's the leadership part of being on the team. Yes, you're all equal in that way in which you've all got to work together. But the leadership quality comes in different ways. And one of them, and again, it's a sportsism, because they bring it. They bring it all the time. Now, what does that mean? Well, it can mean different things, regardless if you're working in an office or if you're a landscaper. It means that every single day that you're doing it to its fullest. And by that, that's an example. Example is leadership. So you're still being an influence, even though you're a part of a team. I believe when I look at the book, and I'm going through some of the chapters, it's very inspiring. And again, I don't know if I'd label it as a self-help book, but to a degree, I would give it out in a business school. I would be giving this out in law. It all applies simply because it is an application, a real life application of the tools that you've learned. And I think it's fascinating that, you know, you going back to Saskatoon and saying, well, I was just an average guy with average grades that worked real hard. It's sort of like you're the Rudy of the space world. You just kept coming until you got to space. And I know you're being humble because you still have to have some real special qualities to do what you do. I'm just curious, in all of this, there still must be things that you look at, even at this point in your life, that you think you could do better. Are there elements you're going, you know, I think I probably could have handled this differently? Do you have those moments?
Oh, all the time. In fact, I read the book now and I go, gee, I wish I'd written this differently or better or whatever. But, you know, I love the athletic metaphor, and arguably doing a spacewalk is the ultimate team sport, right? If something happens outside, we may have the rest of our lives to solve the problem. You got to bring your best every minute of every hour that you're outside the space station doing a spacewalk. And it's something that really resonates with me. When I was training as an astronaut, I tried to read about the high performance literature, and there's a fair amount out there. Art and Senna has a really great book on the psychology of Formula One race car driving, and I think there's lots that apply between different sports, but all of those learnings on how to work together as a team to bring our best relentlessly, that helps us in the space program. So everybody can benefit from the lessons learned in different environments.
So ECW Press is where you can find the book online, of course, good bookstores, everything like that. What has been the reaction so far, Dr. Williams, of the book being on the shelves and having this piece of literature out there in the early months of this release?
We've been getting a lot of really positive feedback. In fact, the University of Windsor is using the book as a reading in its MBA program. And many people within the space agency were really curious to read this right away to see kind of what's in there and who's in there. And we've been getting really positive feedback from within and outside the space program. So Elizabeth and I are absolutely thrilled. It's been a real pleasure working with ECW. And I hope many of the readers go out and pick up a copy of the book and just read it through, no matter where you are on your leadership journey. Hopefully there's something in there that'll help you.
If you and Chris Hadfield had a fight, could you beat him? Could you take him? Do you think? It just occurred to me. Well, let's be honest. Come on. Could you? I think you could take him. I gotta be. Yeah.
Astronauts don't fight.
Yeah.
Well, it's been, I said, to think that someone has, from this country too. I mean, I think that's the other inspiring part of it. It doesn't matter where you come from. I don't know if Saskatoon is the next hotbed of where astronauts come from. I don't know, even though it is. Dave, you lived there for a while, and I know I've spoken there a couple of times.
City of Bridges.
It's a fantastic town, as in all of Western Canada, but it also gives and again, when you talk about inspiration for those that want to achieve something that just at the time may not seem achievable. I think I would argue after reading this book and talking to you, well, why is something not achievable? What makes that unattainable in your lifetime? And the answer usually, unless it's something really quite incredible, like a 5'8" guy like me wanting to be center for the Toronto Raptors, that's a tough one. But for the most part, you can find ways to get things done. That's what's so important about this book. That's why whether you're in Victoria or in Halifax or in Oakville, it really doesn't matter. You can achieve and achieve it regardless of what people tell you that you cannot. And I think that's the real important part about this book. It's up to you to make it happen. And Dr. Dave, fabulous book. It's just a fantastic read. I hope everyone listening to this and out on Twitter, they're going to see a lot of this today. But what a thrill having you here this morning.
Well, thanks very much for having me. It's been a real pleasure sharing some of the stories. And thank you for your great show. I really enjoyed being on it. Oh,
fantastic. That's awesome. Thank you, Doctor. And of course, Chris from the ideashop.ca, who brings us all the best stuff, doesn't he? There's someone who makes things happen too. And usually does it in a turtleneck, which is not common. I got to be honest. It's him and Bazooka Joe. Those are the only two guys that I know. It is 8:55. We got traffic on the fives one more time before we go. Here's Dave.